Hello everyone, I'm your host Andrew.
And I'm Gage.
Thank you for tuning in. Today we will go through a rundown of the history of broadcasting. Starting in the 1860s, James Clerk Maxwell discovered electromagnetism, which started the journey of broadcasting technology. He challenged the idea that radio waves moved in straight lines rather than in a rippling motion.
Later, in the early 20th century, a German engineer named John Neepkow created a rotating disc to transmit images using electric pulses. He called this the Neepkow disc. In 1895, an Italian inventor named Guglielmo Marconi built off Maxwell's ideas. He proved that they could use Morse code through radio waves to talk to others from afar. By 1901, they could cross oceans. By 1906, they were able to use radio waves to transmit music and poetry.
Later on in 1925, a Canadian inventor named Edward Samuel Rogers, better known as Ted Rogers, improved radio by creating ones that were able to operate using household electricity.
Damn. From there on, John Logie Baird, a Scottish inventor, made the first working television set in 1926. Later in 1927, an American inventor, Philo Farnsworth, built off Baird's ideas and created the first fully electronic television system.
He used an image dissector that took moving images and changed them into electronic signals. Later on in 1936, the British Broadcasting Corporation launched the very first high-definition TV service, marking the start of scheduled TV programming. Here's a little bit more information for y'all.
The 1930s and 1940s were crucial decades for the development and commercialization of television. With technological advancements and the establishment of broadcast standards, television began to transition from experimental demonstrations to a mass medium. In 1936, the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, launched the world's first regular high-definition television service, broadcasting from Alexandra Palace in London. The service used Baird's mechanical system initially, but soon switched to the all-electronic Marconi EMI system, which offered better picture quality. This marked the beginning of scheduled television programming and set the stage for future developments in broadcast television. In the United States, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, played a significant role in the standardization and regulation of television broadcasting. In 1941, the FCC approved the NTSC, National Television System Committee, standard for black and white television, which defined the technical specifications for broadcast signals. This standardization was crucial for the widespread adoption of television as it ensured compatibility between different television sets and broadcast signals. World War II temporarily halted the progress of television, but the post-war era saw a rapid expansion of the medium. The late 1940s and early 1950s were marked by the establishment of major television networks such as NBC, National Broadcasting Company, CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System, and ABC, American Broadcasting Company, in the United States. These networks began to produce and broadcast a variety of programs, including news, sports, dramas, and comedies, which attracted a growing audience.
I think it's pretty amazing how far along we've come.
I agree, especially how it's evolved over the years. I think we should turn the knob and tune into another part of broadcasting. Radio broadcasting is one of the first forms of broadcasting to be produced, dating back to 1899, when, during that year, an Italian inventor, Guglielmo Marconi, telegraphed the final scores of the America's Cup yacht races from the SS Ponce to New York land station.
Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I believe it's time to talk about the differences between AM and FM radio. The two have the same workings. The difference between the two is just how the carrier wave is altered. With AM radio, the amplitude or strength of the signal is varied in accordance with the sound information. But with FM radio, the frequency of the carrier signal is varied. Frequency is the number of times the current changes its direction.
The signal being received is an electric current, which is just electrons moving in a wire, usually copper. These electrons aren't just moving forward, but back and forth, 200,000 times per second, in fact. As they move in the wire, they move to the antenna and create an electric field around the antenna. Unlike the electric field in the wire, which shields, the field in the antenna projects or radiates, which is then amplified by the receiver and amplified and processed to produce sound.
Wow. It was good to establish the basics before going back to accomplishments. Back to Marconi. That's just the start of what that genius did. A couple years later, in 1901, December 2nd, he sent the very first transatlantic transmission. A radio signal was sent across 2,100 miles from Cornwall in the UK to Newfoundland, Canada. The transmission was the letter S in Morse code.
In 1906, on Christmas Eve, Marconi made another breakthrough by evolving the radio scene from Morse code onto broadcasting the song Silent Night, played onto a violin. This same night, 6 years prior, a Canadian named Reginald Fessenden was the first person to successfully transmit human voices between two towers on Cobb Island.
There are more inventors and engineers that also accomplished things in radio broadcast department. Le De Forest aired programs in 1910 to the New York Metropolitan Opera House. Then in 1916, Frank Conrad played records on air for his friends. He was an engineer, and this event sparked the idea of radio turning into a public medium. In 1920, something huge happened for radio broadcasting. Westinghouse's KDKA began airing regular broadcasts. One broadcast it aired that year was the presidential election, even before the results could be read in the papers. This is believed to be the catalyst for professional broadcasting. Here's a video that tells more about the KDKA from Harry Jessel on YouTube.
This is the way it was at the Westinghouse Electric Works in Pittsburgh on the night of November 2nd, 1920. I'm sitting in a full-scale recreation of the original KDK transmitter and studio shack just a few hundred yards from where the actual shack had been hastily built. From this humble structure, and through the genius of Westinghouse engineer Dr. Frank Conrad, the newly christened KDKA broadcast the returns from the Harding-Cox presidential election. It sparked a national mania for radio and planted the seeds for all the electronic mass media we have today, everything from TV to TikTok. I'm Larry Richard. You might say I'm a direct descendant of the men who produced that inaugural newscast, and I'm proud to be a part of the 100-year tradition of KDKA and of radio. Every weekday morning, my partner Kevin Battle and I broadcast 4 hours of news. Amazingly, the simple AM radios of 1920 can still tune into my broadcasts. What other electronic medium can boast that its receivers never become obsolete? That first broadcast went for 4 hours, culminating in the announcement that Warren G. Harding had become the 29th President of the United States. While the returns dribbled in, the pioneering broadcasters filled the time playing records on a hand-wound photograph and live banjo music. A local country club made a big party of the broadcast. They set up a receiver in a ballroom along with speakers so that everybody could hear. The guests soon established another broadcasting precedent, calling into the station to complain. Too much music, not enough news, they said. Others had harnessed the power of the airwaves for the better part of 2 decades before KDK had its big moment. But Westinghouse executive Harry P. Davis was the first to see radio's potential as a mass news and entertainment medium, and as a way to make money. Westinghouse pitched radio not as something for enthusiasts and specialists, but for the whole family to tune into regular programming in the living room. Radio was simple, democratic. Anybody could listen in, and they did, in droves. The future of mass media was on the way, and this was the station that started it all. I'm Larry Richard, KDK Radio, Pittsburgh.
Well, that was really interesting. I'm sure that took ages to accomplish.
Yeah, the history of news broadcasting is definitely an interesting aspect in the history of broadcasting as a whole.
Indeed it is. Most of you probably know the idea as technology evolved, news being broadcasted grew and expanded. But you probably didn't know how far back news on TV goes.
The era of silent films is known as a catalyst for film and its progression into society, but even without the ability to speak, news was still presented. Pate, created in 1909 in London, was a silent newsreel presented every 2 weeks and was typically around 4 minutes long. Of course, when microphones were being better produced and the idea of sound being in film became more normalized, the newsreels started having dialogue in them.
It was obviously during this time that American broadcasters such as NBC and CBS started getting into the picture.
Of course. They were among the first major news broadcasters in the US, and boy were they competitive. NBC was the most watched in terms of entertainment, however, so the former CBS president William Paley was determined to give better, more reliable news, as well as commentary.
Although news was reliably being seen from newspapers, you typically had to find them either on the street or at a local vendor. With the increasing technology, news could be broadcasted quickly on television at the comfort of your own home for millions of Americans back in the 30s and 40s. This was heavily relied upon during World War II until the U.S. joined. World War II not only mainly brought the U.S. out of a Great Depression, it also massively increased quality for the news, as 20% of news schedules covered World War II.
Since news and television evolved to be significantly better than it was even 2 decades ago, it was a no-brainer that politics and news in the US was next.
After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the modern-day coverage of news with the morning and afternoon time slots came into fruition. The killing of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby then became the first killing in the U.S. Nixon's Watergate scandal was the first major U.S. politician scandal to be mass broadcasted, and due to political debates being broadcasted, this became yet another influence for the American public on how to vote. The breakthroughs came one after another.
However, instead of showing you something recent, such as the January 6th riots, the Ukraine v. Russia conflict, 9/11, the war on Afghanistan, or the Los Angeles fires, why not do something a little bit more important?
Yeah, why not? The Vietnam War was known as the first television war. To understand what I'm talking about, why not go to Christmas dinner in Vietnam, where troops are simply eating and taking a break from the war in 1966?
We would show you the first broadcast, but that probably doesn't exist, and if it does, it's probably in a museum.
Yeah. Let's roll the clip!
That was a home run!
Speaking of which, that brings us to our next topic, the history of sports broadcasting.
It all began in 1911 in Jayhawk Land in Kansas. Around 1,000 people gathered together to watch a reproduction of a football game between Kansas and Missouri. They set up a telegraph wire in Missouri and had someone call out what happened during every play. They were then able to map it out using a model of a football field.
In 1921, the first live voice broadcast of a boxing match went down. From there, everything went up. Throughout the year, more and more teams started broadcasting their games over radio until just about every sports team had a broadcast.
The first broadcast of the NFL, the National Football League, took place in 1939 between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Here's a short clip from the game.
I just think it's so cool to see old footage like that.
Yeah, for sure. Vintage NFL was legendary. I just wish we had footage of the first televised NBA game.
Me too.
Did you know that the first ever TV show was made in 1928? It was made by J. Hartley Manners and was the first TV drama called The Queen's Messenger.
The Queen's Messenger was a 40-minute episode that was originally a radio show but was then moved into a television show.
And throughout the years, TV has evolved with the times and the new technology, having new and more modern shows happen.
If we go ahead 20 or so years, we can get ourselves over to 1948, to the first televised version of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, after it had originally been broadcast through radio.
And if we head over to the 60s, we can find the first airing of The Addams Family in 1964.
Let's head away from live TV real quick and take a look at the first ever cartoon that aired on TV.
Yep, Phantasmagoria was the first cartoon that aired on live television. It's a collection of drawings put together to make a film close to a stop-motion film. Let's have a look at that, shall we? Wow! What a cartoon!
Indeed, compared to how they are today, it's crazy how they've evolved.
Did you know that cable started in small communities in rural Oregon and Pennsylvania? They use devices called CATV, which stands for Community Antenna Television. That device receives broadcast signals from communication satellites.
The reason they wanted the CATV was that they lived in hilly terrain and it was very hard, especially in 1948, to get broadcast signals, and the CATV made sure they got the broadcast signals.
But the first time cable television was even mentioned as a thing was by Television Digest, owned by Triangle Publishing. They first reported on the construction system of the Ed Parsons system. Later in the 1950s, a man named Bert Harris started his career in broadcasting, where he got involved with cable and bought successful franchises. One of his partners, Time Life Broadcasting, got Time Life involved for the first time in cable.
In 1957, Ed Whitney became the first executive director of the National Cable Television Association. Funny enough, a year later, the United States Tax Court rules in teleservice company of Wyoming Valley ruled that the CATV cannot treat installation charges, basically saying you can't use the CATV to get broadcast signals if you live in a place with bad signals because federal tax purposes, and this tax issue led to the formation of the National Community Television Council.
There were two teleprompters named Irving B. Kahn and Hubert J. Schlafly. They had a key TV early paid TV concept during the second Patterson's v. Johansson heavyweight boxing fight to get paid for doing sports events. By the time in 1969, 22,060 cable systems were serving more than 3.6 million hours.
By 1988, television channels began stereo audio deployment on a wide scale. 1 year later, by 1989, the peak of cable across America, there were 79 total cable networks and 53 million subscribers over the U.S.
200 channels and nothing to watch? That wasn't always a problem in America, because we didn't always have 200 channels. Everything changed when cable was born. Back in the 1940s, broadcast television was transforming the country. TV signal was transmitted from local towers to rabbit ear antenna, but reception was a hit or miss. Not everyone could get a signal. So a few enterprising Americans found a workaround. One of them being John Walson, a TV salesman in rural Pennsylvania. Walson put an antenna on a hilltop and ran a wire down to his TV store. The idea of cable was born. By 1952, these community antennas serviced 14,000 cable subscribers in 70 different places nationwide. And unlike local broadcasters, antenna operators could pick up signals from far away, allowing cable customers to access new content. In 1972, Charles Dolan launched Home Box Office, or HBO. 4 years later, in 1976, Ted Turner founded what would become TBS, and later created CNN. The cable industry gave rise to new titans, who took advantage of satellite technology to reach larger audiences. By the 1990s, cable took off, and there were millions of subscribers to dozens of cable companies across the country. Cable reached millions of American households for decades. And then the internet arrived. First, it was just dial-up, like your old AOL free trial CDs. You remember those. Service traveled over old copper phone lines owned by phone companies. Cable providers quickly realized that the fat wires they had built to transmit hundreds of TV channels could also be used to provide internet service. So they started selling high-speed internet with their cable bundles. Suddenly, illegally downloading that Red Hot Chili Peppers album on Napster got a whole lot faster. But stringing every household in America with cable wire is expensive. Cable companies effectively divided up the country rather than compete directly against each other. Content providers then created more and more channels. Cable operators paid to carry them and passed on fees to consumers. This left Americans with high bills and confusing bundle options. Today, millennials especially have cut their cable subscriptions and flocked to streaming services like Hulu and Netflix, which are more affordable and, supply endless content to meet the binge-watching demand. The shift has had profound effects. Media companies like Disney and Viacom relied on money from cable bundles for decades. Now they're struggling to transform in the new world. For Disney, that means buying a huge chunk of 21st Century Fox, a deal that will increase its suite of TV shows and movies. Meanwhile, cable companies are relying on selling internet service and looking to also expand into the cell phone industry.
She's got no Wi-Fi.
So, how these companies, regulators, and consumers navigate this new world of options will determine the future of cable. Stay tuned.
With that, we move on to the history of streaming, though you could barely call it history. In only 30 years, internet streaming has gone from a concept to the most popular way around the world to consume content.
The first instances of video streaming online occurred throughout the early 90s, with the first live stream taking place on June 24th, 1993. The live stream was a video concert featuring the band's severe tire damage. However, the first instance of a big media corporation getting in on the streaming game wouldn't occur until a few years later.
In September of 1995, ESPN hosted their first online radio event covering a baseball game between the Seattle Mariners and the New York Yankees. This showed that streaming had the potential to be the next big thing in media. ESPN didn't stream that game with video because creating a live stream anywhere close to today's standards would have been near impossible. Throughout the next decade, however, Adobe Flash Player, MPEG video, and adaptive bitrate all spread across the internet, improving on those issues.
Our next landmark event is the launch of the video sharing website YouTube in April 2005. One of the first viral videos on the site was the home video, Charlie Bit My Finger. Let's have a look.
Charlie bit me. Ah. Ah. Oh, ouch. Ouch. Ouch, Charlie. Ow. Charlie, that really hurt. No, Charlie bit me. And that really hurt, Charlie, and it's still hurting.
Though you've probably heard of YouTube, what many don't know is that a similar French website, Dailymotion, launched 1 month earlier. YouTube was originally known for those classic low-quality home videos, but due to its accessibility, this site took off quickly, and by July 2006, YouTube was gaining a reported 100 million views per day. The site has continued to grow ever since, with no end in sight.
If you had to say which form of media streaming fit best, video games would have to be in contention. In October 2006, the website Justin TV launched, allowing users to live stream themselves to a wider audience on the website. The website later changed its name to Twitch.tv and is now the most popular video game streaming service on the internet.
In a similar fashion to the rise of YouTube and Twitch, in January of 2007, Netflix launched their streaming website and ushered in the modern era of video streaming. Before their streaming service, Netflix had acted as a DVD rental company, similar to Blockbuster Video. But the break into the growing online market threw the popularity of Netflix higher than anyone could have ever imagined. Though it must be mentioned that there is a lot more competition than there used to be. In recent years, many streaming services have risen up to challenge Netflix's popularity, and this has led to many shows and movies leaving Netflix and becoming a part of other streaming services.
Streaming has grown more and more popular each year. During the COVID-19 pandemic, live streams alone saw a 300% increase in viewership. And that pretty much brings us to today. Throughout the 2010s and 2020s, streaming has simply expanded across the world, and the amount of services available has increased. But if we can learn anything from streaming history, is that things are sure to change at some point, and all of us will likely be affected.
Throughout the years, there have been hundreds of thousands of broadcasts. However, only a few top the charts.
One thing that dominates the top 10 charts through many countries of the world is soccer. Countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Australia, and Brazil have their top 10 dominated by the sport. India's top 10, on the other hand, is completely composed of cricket matches, whereas 5 of New Zealand's top 10 broadcast spots are broadcasts of rugby.
France is the one country that stands out, however. 6 of their top 10 broadcasts consist of speeches by their president Emmanuel Macron. Most are addressing the COVID-19 pandemic.
Across the pond in the United States, some of the most viewed interviews were Michael Jackson, President Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and along with Barack Obama.
When it comes to regular broadcasting in the United States, the Super Bowls take over the top 10 list. Spots 2 through 9 are taken up by the annual championship games, only topped by the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. Averaging 125 to 150 million viewers, that's roughly half the population of the US, these people watched in awe as they watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin be the first people to set foot on the moon. This is also the broadcast where Neil Armstrong said the famous phrase, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
If you exclude Super Bowls in the United States TV show finales, top 10 top the charts. MASH's finale leads the way with 106 million viewers, followed by hit shows such as Dallas, Cheers, and Seinfeld. The lists are rounded up by politics, the Clinton-Trump debate, the Carter-Reagan debate, as well as coverage of the Gulf War also take their place in the prestigious top 10 list in the United States.
The most viewed broadcasts across the world are the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, racking up 750 million views, followed by the London Olympics with approximately 900 million views. The touching saving of the Chilean miners amassed approximately 1 billion viewers. This event is surpassed by the FIFA World Cup 2022, along with Leon Spinks v. Muhammad Ali fight with 1.5 and 2 billion views respectively. The funerals of Michael Jackson and Diana, the Princess of Wales, had 2 billion viewers each. By far topping them all are the Olympic Games. Since 2002, each of them has easily topped 2.5 billion viewers each, if not 3 to 3.5 billion viewers.
That's a lot of numbers. Let's take a quick look at a video that features some of the most viewed broadcasts of all time.
Well, that was great. I never knew the amount of views a TV broadcast could get.
Well, that's all we have for you today. Remember, CTE, stay classy, and we will catch you next time.